All right, I think it's 10 o'clock, so we will begin. Everyone, welcome to a meeting of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization. I'm David Muller, Secretary Pollock here. Consistent with Governor Baker's orders around COVID-19, we are holding this meeting virtually. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. Please rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and affiliation, if any. Please do not unmute and mute yourselves. The host will take care of it. To participate in the discussion, please select the raise hand function. You can find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with a raise hand button at the bottom. The presenters will then call on participants and unmute their microphones. If you're on the phone, you can use *9 to raise your hand. If you have any technical difficulties, please contact Regine Foley via the chat box at rfoley, F-O-L-E-Y, at cps.org or at 857-702-3704. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1 Level AA standards and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, please contact Regine Foley of the MPO staff at rfoley, F-O-L-E-Y, at cps.org, or call her at 857-702-3704. And as always, please be mindful we are recording these meetings. Now it's time for introductions. Regine, you want to call the roll?
Sure. MassDOT Chair.
I am here. David Moeller.
MassDOT Highway.
Looks like John Bouchard is still joining.
Okay, we can go on to the next MassDOT Highway seat. John Romano.
John Romano here.
Thank you. MBTA.
Samantha Silverberg. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you. Massachusetts Port Authority.
Good morning. This is Laura Gilmore with the Massachusetts Port Authority.
Thank you. Metropolitan Area Planning Council.
Hello, this is Eric Barassa with MAPC.
Thank you. MBTA Advisory Board.
Good morning, everyone. Brian Kane, MBTA Advisory Board present.
Thank you. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Hunter Diggins with the Advisory Council, present.
Thank you. City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department. I don't see Tom Kadzis. Perhaps we can come back. City of Boston, Boston Planning and Development Agency.
Hi, just on Tom Kadzis. He's actually on vacation this week, and Bill Conroy is covering for BTD, but I just heard from him he's having a few technical difficulties, so he should be on hopefully very soon. But anyway, I'm Jim Fitzgerald with the BPDA representing Mayor Walsh with the City of Boston. Thanks.
Thank you. At-large city, City of Everett.
Hi, Jay Monty, representing Mayor DeMaria in the City of Everett.
At-large city, City of Newton.
Hi, Nicole Friedman, City of Newton. Thank you.
Thank you. At-large town, Town of Arlington.
Dean Lamstutz, Town of Arlington, representing Select Board Chair John Hurd.
Thank you. At-large town, Town of Brookline.
Hi, Heather Hamilton for the Town of Brookline.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Good morning, Tom Bent, representing the City of Somerville, Mayor Joe Curtatone in the Inner Core.
Thank you. Magic Subregion, Town of Acton. We don't see Austin, so we will move on. Metro West, City of Framingham.
All right, I found the button. Thatcher Keyser, representing Mayor Spicer, City of Framingham.
Thank you. North Shore, Beverly. Oh, I think I see Darlene coming in right this moment. We will come back. North Suburban, Woburn.
Can you hear me? Yes, good morning. Tina Cassidy, representing Woburn Mayor Scott Galvin and the North Suburban Planning Council.
Thank you. South Shore Coalition, Town of Rockland. Not see Jen Constable. And SWAP, Town of Medway.
Peter Pelletier, present.
Thank you. And Trick, Norwood, NRRC.
Good morning, Tom O'Rourke from the town of Norwood, representing the Trick subregion.
Thank you. I'll call the ex officio members. Federal Highway.
Good morning, Ken Miller, Federal Highway Administration.
Thank you. Is anyone here from Federal Transit Administration? Okay, I'll go back to MassDOT C2. Is John Bouchard here?
John Bouchard, Mass DOT, representing Highway Administrator Jonathan Gulliver, present.
Thank you. Let's see, did Bill Conroy make it in? I don't see him. And who else? Beverly. North Shore Beverly, is Darlene here?
Yep. Hi, this is Darlene Wynn representing Mayor Cahill from Beverly.
Okay, thank you. And that calls the roll.
Thank you, Roisin. Next item on the agenda is the chair's report. I don't have one at this time. So the next item up is the executive director's report. Tegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It's actually a sunny Thursday, which has been nice as of late, and I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving. I wanted to make a quick announcement or two, and I know we have a lot on the agenda today, so I will try to be brief, but hopefully helpful. First, I wanted to announce that we did have an offer accepted and are bringing on our Deputy Executive Director. So that will be the person who will report directly to me. Her name is Gina Perot, and we'll send up a follow-up communication for folks so that you have this in an email format. But she'll be starting actually towards the end of December, and she should be here at a board meeting to introduce herself to you, likely at a later MPO meeting in January. So hopefully get to know her soon if you don't already. We recruited her through a pretty robust process. We actually had so many very good candidates. And so we had a multiple stage process where we engaged staff at all levels of the organization to talk with her in a first round. And then we had kind of a leadership focused second round. And we included MEPC, our fiscal agent, and our sister regional agency on both of those stages throughout the process. So I think it was very successful. And she comes to us with really extensive leadership experience in both the public and private sectors. And she's had a role in the sectors involving civic engagement. She's done a lot of work in terms of communications. And in the past, she actually worked for the city of Boston for the Boston Public Library System. So she's got a great rounded set of experience, and she, I believe, is our best fit for the needs we have in terms of our operations, our communications, and in particular, because we are engaging in strategic planning as an organization. So I think she'll make a great addition at a really important time. If you have any other questions or would like to learn more, let me know. But again, we'll send out a communication sometime soon. So with that, I just wanted to then touch on a couple of our outreach, ongoing outreach activities. Most of these were at least mentioned last time, but just for a little more clarification. First of all, in support of both our new board member representing Brookline, but also our new representative sitting on the board for Medway representing SWAP, we are doing 2 orientation sessions that we're calling MPO 101s. The dates are now finalized as December 8th and January 7th. And you can go to the MPO calendar and sign up through links there and or contact Roisin Foley for any more information. Her contact information is there at the bottom of the agenda on the slide. And I just wanted to say again that even if you've been on the board, it can be a really great way to sort of meet more staff, learn more about various MPO processes you haven't been as involved in. So we welcome anyone who would like to attend. And then I also wanted to remind you that we've posted an FAQ page for the MPO and CTPS. It's at bostonmpo.org/FAQ, very easy to find. And again, we're very much welcoming any feedback you have on whether or not that answers questions you might have. I know everybody always has questions about MPO and CTPS and how we work. So let us know if you have any feedback, please. And then finally, staff have been attending the sub-regional meetings being hosted by MAPC, and there are 2 more coming up, one for TRIC and the other for SWAP. And those will be this month in December. So with that, I'll just briefly chat about today. We do have a very heavy full agenda, and we didn't feel like we could tighten it up any more than we already did. And we're going to switch around the order so that we can first focus on the TIP amendment that's coming from the MBTA's work on their Forging Ahead planning process. So this amendment, which is the second amendment to the 21 to 25 TIP, is for you today in front of you to be voted out if you choose for the 21-day public review period. And it involves the capital reallocation proposal that sort of matches what the MBTA has been doing with their Forging Ahead work. So I will leave questions to that, of course, to Samantha Silverberg or others from the MBTA who are here to discuss it. And then we'll move on to a very different topic, which will be both the work we have done and also the work that staff will do related to trip generation rates. So estimating the trips that will be produced from new developments. This has been a big challenge even without the pandemic because we're using typically national data that don't necessarily reflect the conditions in the Northeast or New England. So we'll talk a little bit about the work we did to look at more innovative ways to think about trip estimation and then what the next steps are for a work scope going forward. And then after that, we'll have a few more work scopes. Usually they come first, but we'll have them at the end of this meeting. So please stick around if you can to vote them if you so choose to approve them so we can get moving on that work. I won't list them here verbally. They're in the agenda and they're in front of you. But again, if you can, please stick around to make those votes. And with that, I will turn it over to our agenda for today.
Have you taken any questions for Tegan from the members? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is public comment. If you would like to make a comment at this time, please raise your hand and we will call on you. And also, if you don't have the raise hand function, you can dial *9, or you can always use your chat box. Brad Rawson, City of Somerville. Brad, please introduce yourself for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. My name is Brad Rawson. I serve the City of Somerville as Director of Mobility in Mayor Joe Curtatoni's office. I'd like to provide a quick public comment for the board's benefit, and this will echo some of the mayor's comments that he provided at the control board last week on the Forging Ahead topic, and I think it's relevant to the MPO board. Mr. Chair, the mayor's comments on the financial crisis to date have focused on regional solidarity, and our comments will continue to work on behalf of our peers and our neighbors because Chelsea's success is Somerville's success. Quincy's need is Somerville's need. It remains the city's position, and Mass DOT and the MBTA are being forced into premature, damaging, and unique austerity measures compared with other state agencies and other essential public services. We reiterate our call for the Massachusetts legislature to deliver emergency funding to the T to address the urgent and overlapping crises of public health, social equity, economic recovery, and climate change. A couple of quick comments. Somerville has embodied the municipal partnership that the MBTA has described as essential to success at the T. We've been delivering dedicated bus lanes since 2017. We have implemented the largest number of phase 1 better bus changes of any municipality in the region. We've consolidated stops and built in-lane bus stops. We've restricted 500 curbside parking spaces since 2015 to speed up transit and achieve safe routes to transit in our community. We spend our own money and we put our own political capital on the line in service of reliable, equitable mass transit. Regarding the current scenario, we want to point out a couple of important routes in our jurisdiction that overlap with some of our inner core peers. We object to the logic that defines local bus services in Somerville, Medford, and Arlington as redundant today in context of Green Line service tomorrow. Route 80, Route 88, and Route 90 may offer opportunities for modification in the coming years, but Mr. Chairman, the proper forum for analysis, discussion, and debate is the MBTA's bus network redesign project, which the staff have done a great job on. Our staff have served faithfully as task force members on. That is the proper forum for discussing these types of proposals. So we remain the MBTA's partners and the MPO's partners. We just wanted to take this opportunity to remind folks that we are working hard to carry a regional mantle, preserve transit that is essential for the entire region, as well as for our constituents in Somerville. Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Brad. Are there other comments at this time? Seeing none during the meeting, if you have a comment, raise your hand and we will call on you. Next item on the agenda is committee chairs reports. Are there any? Jay Monty.
Good morning, everybody. So next, two weeks from today, I believe that is the 17th, there will be a congestion management committee meeting. I would note also that we are looking for new members. I believe we have lost a few in the past couple of years, and there's some seats that have not been filled. I know there's some new communities on here since then that have joined the MPO, and certainly I would hope we can maybe have a discussion about your potential interest in joining the CMP, the Congestion Management Committee. So again, 17th next Thursday, or two Thursdays from now, and again, any interested members, please let myself know. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Any questions for Jay? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is the Regional Transportation Advisory Council report. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, first, I'd like to applaud Mr. Ross and me for and Somerville for taking that regional approach. I mean, I think it's laudable. I mean, I actually like to see my community take more of that approach. It's really the way that we need to work together, because we are just all so small as individual municipalities. Anyways, back to the advisory council. We did not have a meeting, but we're having one in this coming Wednesday, and that will feature Sandy Johnson, who's going to talk with us about the UPW, opening up the UPW for ideas, and also we'll have a conversation about the community connections, and Matt DeNova, who's going to introduce us, the advisory council, to the TIP universe. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for November 5th. Can I get a motion and a second from a member, and please state your name for the record? Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, Town of Arlington, move to approve the minutes.
Tom Bent.
Tom Bent seconds that motion.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded. Are there any comments, changes, questions, or suggestions? Seeing none, please call the roll, Roisin.
Mastot Chair,
Yes.
Mastot Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
Mastot Highway,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Yes.
Massport,
Yes.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department, I think we're still missing Bill. City of Boston, Boston Planning and Development,
Yes.
At Large City of Everett,
Jay Bonte, yes.
At Large City of Newton,
Yes.
At Large Town of Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
At Large Town of Brookline,
Heather Hamilton votes yes.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville,
Tom Bent votes yes.
Metro West, City of Framingham,
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
North Shore, Town of Beverly, Okay, we can come back to Darlene. North Suburban Planning Council, Woburn.
Gina Cassidy votes yes.
Thank you. South Shore Coalition. Okay, Jen has not joined us. Swap, Town of Medway.
Yes. Peter Pelletier.
Thank you. Trick, Town of Norwood, NRRC.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
We'll try Darlene again. Okay, it seems like we're having some trouble unmuting Darlene. That motion passes.
Thank you, Rosine. Next item on the agenda is an adjustment to federal fiscal year 2021-2025 Transportation Improvement Program. Matt Genova.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. So for my first presentation today, I'll give you an overview of Adjustment 1 to the federal fiscal years 2021 through 2025 TIP. This is not to be confused with Amendment 1, which this board voted out for public review at the last MPO meeting on November 19th. As a reminder, TIP adjustments are not required to be released for a public review period, as they are considered administrative modifications to the TIP. This means that a vote to approve the adjustment today will make this action final. There's a summary table detailing the contents of Adjustment 1 posted to the MPO meeting calendar under today's date, and that table is reproduced on the slide here for your reference. Adjustment 1 includes one project, the awarding of a Mobility for All grant from the Federal Transit Administration to the Metro West RTA. This grant will support MWRTA in exploring a new demand response accessibility model along with complementary technology. This service will expand access to transportation options for seniors and people with disabilities within the Metro West region by supporting strategic partnerships with coordinating Council on Access and Mobility agencies. Customers will now be able to request trips on demand rather than needing to book in advance, eliminating a significant barrier for many who use the existing service to get to medical appointments and access other essential destinations. The FTA Mobility for All grant is for $300,000, with $75,000 in matching funding coming from state contract assistance. This project was already amended into the federal fiscal years 2020 through 2024 TIP into federal fiscal year 2021. And this adjustment just carries that action forward into federal fiscal year 2021 of the current TIP, the federal fiscal years 2021 through 25 TIP. The reason for this modification is that the project could not be amended into the 21 through 25 TIP prior to that TIP being approved by our federal partners and going into effect after October 1st of this year. This adjustment will allow MWRTA to move forward with the project in this fiscal year. That's all I have on Adjustment 1, so I'll turn it back over to the chair for questions and a vote on the adjustment.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt from the MPO members or the public? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to approve this adjustment as presented today? Please state your name and affiliation for the record. Eric Barassi.
I make a motion to support this Amendment 1.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz Arlington seconds the motion.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded to approve this adjustment as presented today. Please call the roll.
Mascot Chair.
This is David Moeller, yes.
Mascot Seat 2.
John Bouchard, yes.
Mascot Highway.
John Romano, yes.
MBTA.
Yes.
Massachusetts Port Authority.
Yes.
MAPC.
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board.
Kane, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston BPDA.
Yes.
Large City, City of Everett.
Jay Monty, yes.
At Large City of Newton. Yes. At-large Town of Arlington.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
At-large Town of Brookline.
Heather Hamilton, yes.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville.
Tom Bent, yes.
Metro West, City of Framingham.
Thatcher Keezer votes yes.
North Shore, Town of Beverly.
Darlene Nguyen votes yes.
North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn.
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Swap, Town of Medway.
Peter Pelletier votes yes.
Trick, Town of Norwood, NRRC.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
That motion passes.
Thank you, Regine. Next item on the agenda is Amendment 2 to the federal fiscal year 2021 to 2025 Transportation Improvement Program. Matt Genova, I guess you'll go first and then Sam Silverberg, or is it the other way around?
Yeah, I will introduce the amendment and Samantha and then let her take it away. So thank you, Mr. Chair. In addition to the adjustment that was just voted on, we'll also discuss Amendment 2 to the federal fiscal years 2021 through 2025 TIP. Amendment 2 includes the reallocation of transit capital funds to cover operating expenses as a part of the MBTA's Forging Ahead initiative in response to the disruption in fare revenue precipitated by COVID-19 and the resulting drop in system ridership. This conversation will focus on the contents of the amendment and will conclude with this board taking a vote on the amendment's release for a 21-day public comment period. This comment period is an excellent time to make your voice heard on these changes, as are the upcoming FMCB meeting and the MBTA's dedicated Forging Ahead public meetings. I want to emphasize that this is just the first step in the amendment process, and Amendment 2 will not be considered for a final vote of approval until the MPO meeting on January 7th. So I'll turn it over to Samantha Silverberg of the MBTA to talk through the details of Amendment 2, after which we'll have the opportunity for a discussion and a vote. So Samantha, feel free to take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, David, and the rest of the MPO board. So this is the second presentation about the MBTA strategy to reallocate resources from the capital program to the operating budget in order to support essential service. In October, we discussed the overall Forging Ahead process and principles, the amounts we were targeting for reallocation, and the decision framework we would use for the exercise. Since then, we've presented to the MPO's Transit Working Group and held 11 public meetings targeting different regions around the Commonwealth. Today, I will present the results of our process and propose next steps to execute the proposed short-term reallocation of federal formula funds to preventative maintenance through an amendment to the FFY 21 through 25 TIP. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will ask the MPO board to vote to release the TIP amendment for public review. As Matt said, today we are not asking you to approve this amendment, but rather release it for public comment, and we will have extensive time to engage on your feedback and others during that time. So next slide, please. For context, this is part of the broader Forging Ahead initiative, which is the MBTA's process to prioritize our limited resources to the riders who need us the most. COVID-19 has significantly changed where and how people travel, resulting in a significant drop in ridership and fare revenue. For context, a year ago, over 1.3 million trips were taken on the MBTA. Today, that number is a little over 300,000. As you've heard, the MBTA is projecting a large budget shortfall for FY22 and proposing to fill it with a mix of internal savings initiatives, reallocating capital resources to the operating budget, and targeted service reductions. Next slide. The capital reallocation is a critical element of our overall strategy. I will quote MPO board member Brian Kane, who said this is our least bad option. Again, this is not something we want to do, but we feel that we need to in order to preserve service for our transit critical populations. If we are unable to achieve the capital element of our strategy, we would need to go deeper on one of the other two elements, either service planning adjustments or internal budget savings. We do recognize that, that assumptions and expectations are changing, but one of the reasons that we are targeting capital in this way is that we can pause projects now, and then when revenue and ridership recover, we can turn them on relatively easily. Next slide. As you've heard, we are targeting two specific funding changes to reallocate resources from the capital program to the operating budget. First, we're proposing to flex federal formula funds from capital projects to preventative maintenance, which is what we are speaking about today. And second, we will be allocating capital employee salaries to project budgets consistent with law and guidance. As the MPO board knows, the MBTA receives approximately $300 million per year in federal formula grants from the FTA. Historically, we've used those funds for capital costs, but the FTA also allows them to be used toward preventative maintenance. Using the decision framework we discussed previously, a working group across the MBTA reviewed our entire capital portfolio to identify a limited set of projects that could be paused or scaled down with minimal impact to safety, service, and other agency priorities. The proposed approach is aligned with the two principles on the slide. It reflects a time-limited reallocation, and it continues the upward trajectory of the capital program. One thing I'd like to note is that we anticipate over 95% of the FY21 CIP would continue as planned, and the MBTA would be able to achieve our overall investment goal of $1.75 billion set earlier this year. Next slide, please. This slide provides a recap of the work that we have completed since our last presentation and the key next steps. First, and most notably, the Commonwealth has committed an additional $140 million in state bond cap for MBTA projects. This is a significant increase for the MBTA, which receives $60 million per year in state bond cap for capital improvements, in addition to project-specific funding for South Coast Rail. As detailed on a later slide, these funds allow the T to accelerate select projects and reduce the impact of the proposed reallocation on the capital program. Second, the legislature enacted the governor's proposal on capital employee salaries, which will allow the T to charge staff costs to project budgets, consistent with general accounting principles and federal guidance. Third, as I noted, our team reviewed all projects in the CIP and identified a limited portfolio to pause for reconsideration until the next 5-year CIP. And fourth, and most important to the MPO, staff prepared a draft amendment to the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, which, as you know, is the regional planning document that lists all of our transportation projects receiving federal funding. And if approved, that TIP amendment would allow the MBTA to reallocate an initial $380 million in fiscal year 21-22 federal formula funds to preventative maintenance. So our next steps both involve you all, which is today we're presenting the TIP amendment, and in January, tentatively January 7th, we would request your vote to endorse it. Next slide, please. I want to emphasize again that the proposal has minimal impact on the 21 CIP that was approved by the joint board in June of this year. The MBTA, MassDOT, the Commonwealth all published a 1-year capital plan this year rather than our traditional 5-year capital plan due to uncertainty about COVID as well as federal and state funding programs. MassDOT and the T have already begun the process to develop our next 5-year plan, and that will reflect updated funding assumptions and COVID scenario planning. As I mentioned earlier, over 95% of the FY21 CIP projects would continue unchanged, which includes major programs like the Green Line extension, South Coast Rail, the Red and Orange Line program, fare transformation, and more. And as I mentioned, we believe we can still achieve our spending goals set earlier this year. Next slide. The Commonwealth has allocated an additional $140 million in proceeds of general obligation bonds, which is tremendously helpful to the MBTA. These funds allow us to do two things. One, accelerate critical bus lane and power projects during a period of low ridership. And two, avoid pausing projects initially identified as candidates for reallocation. The way that this is most impactful to the MPO is that, as you will see, we have swapped out some projects that were previously planned to be funded with federal funds that will now be funded with MBTA and state funds, thus freeing up those federal funds for preventative maintenance. This here lists the projects that are primarily benefiting from the additional state funds. As I mentioned, we are accelerating bus lanes and duct bank work. And then there were 3 projects that were previously on our list to pause that we are now moving forward because of the net increase in resources. And those are the Worcester Line, Worcester Triple Track, which also includes accessibility work, the Green Line Central Tunnel, and the Worcester Union Station project, which is the recipient of an FRA grant, and we will be using non-federal funds as the local match. Next slide. So moving to the reallocation program proposal, this is the framework we reviewed at our last presentation. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through the details, but the important thing is that we considered ridership, either current ridership or potential future ridership, and then different impacts related to safety, accessibility, capacity, and expansion as we reviewed our entire capital program. Next slide. So at a high level, these are the results of our review. First, we will continue over 95% of the CIP with no changes. And then for some specifics, we will pause further investment in expansion and capacity projects absent external funding. We propose to pause some station upgrade projects, including wayfinding, or scale back to critical safety investments. We propose to pause or scale down some commuter rail vehicle facility and capacity projects consistent with the service planning proposal, while continuing to lay the groundwork for the future. We propose pausing or scaling back a handful of lower priority projects with partial funding. And then, given our funding outlook, we are revisiting the scope and timeline for our major transformation programs, and this will be part of our active conversation on the 23 to 26 CIP in the coming weeks and months. And finally, we are focused on delivering existing projects as our top priority, while also building an appropriately sized design pipeline should there be federal stimulus, additional state funds, or anything else that anyone wants to throw our way. The full list of projects is in the appendix of this presentation. I'm going to focus specifically on the tip changes, but if you're interested in the full list of projects, which also include projects that are funded by non-federal sources, they are in the appendix, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I just want to reinforce again that these projects are not being canceled or being removed from the CIP. We are pausing further commitments and will revisit them during our comprehensive 5-year CIP process this spring as we know more about COVID impacts to MBTA ridership, revenue, and potentially other funding sources. Let's go on to the next slide. So as you all know, the mechanism for flexing formula funds from capital to operating is an amendment to the TIP. Endorsed by the MPO. We have prepared a TIP amendment to reprogram an initial $380 million of available and anticipated federal formula funds from capital projects to preventative maintenance. You have those tables as attachments to the meeting agenda. The amendment includes focusing just on the preventative maintenance and the capital reallocation, because there's actually a few other things happening in that amendment. But if we just focus on the capital reallocation, it includes $171 million in FY20 carryover funds that would be available immediately, $179 million in FY21 funds that would be provided once Congress enacts full year appropriations, hopefully in the next week since the CR expires on December 11th, and $30 million in anticipated FFY 22 funds. And as part of the 5-year CIP process in the spring and the TIP process, we would identify the next tranche of funds or adjust the totals if revenue or ridership exceed current projections. One thing I want to note for this group is that unlike highway funding, transit funding can carry over from year to year. That's why you see in this table FY20 funding, even though we are currently in the middle of FY21. And similarly, when you look at the TIP tables that are attached to the meeting invite, it appears as if new money has materialized. That is not new money. It is carryover from prior years that we are applying to obligations in FY21 and beyond. Next slide, please. So the proposed TIP amendment you have before you includes 2 main types of changes. One category of changes is related to the Forging Ahead initiative and includes a set of projects that will be paused and a set of projects that will continue, but using non-federal funds. Another set of changes is what we call technical adjustments, and it's mostly related to minor changes related to project timing and cost. Let's go to the next slide. So this slide here, which I anticipate is of the most interest to MPO board members, summarizes the project changes in the TIP. There's a lot of moving pieces, so we thought this slide was a helpful way to pull it all together so you can see the critical changes. So from the top, the procurement of bi-level coaches is being paused. The reason for that pause is that we are obviously assessing the future of commuter rail service. Ridership is significantly lower, and the current service proposals would require a smaller fleet than what we currently maintain. That said, there is a project to assess the future fleet consistent with Rail Vision, and that project is moving forward. So the procurement of new coaches is paused, but the planning for the future fleet continues. The next 5 projects that are all Green Line related are all continuing. They are just not going to be using federal funds. We are using a combination of the state bond cap that I mentioned we received and MBTA bond funds to resource these projects moving forward. The benefit of that is the funds, the federal funds that otherwise would be programmed to these projects are now freed up, and we can use those for preventative maintenance. The next 4 projects are largely commuter rail station projects. These are all currently being paused for reconsideration as part of the next CIP. Again, should the ridership and revenue situation change, should additional funding sources be available to the MBTA, these would be restarted. They are not being removed, they are not being canceled. And then finally, the Worcester Union Station project, we received a discretionary grant from the Federal Railroad Administration, and so this is being removed from this part of the TIP, but you will actually see it in a different part of the TIP because of that discretionary grant, and we are using non-federal funds for the match. So, and then the last line you see, this 32 million in technical adjustments, is a couple dozen puts and takes. Again, I'm happy to meet with anyone who wants to really dig into the details, but those are not changes of substance, but rather changes related to timing, project cost, and other adjustments that are, since we're doing a TIP amendment, we thought it was worthwhile to make those happen now. Okay. Next slide, and again, I'm happy to come back to these during the question period. So next steps, today we are sharing our TIP amendment and asking the MPO to release it for public review. We plan to seek final approval on January 7th, and then once approved, we would proceed through the administrative steps with MassDOT, with FHWA, FTA to access our funds. And then the last slide here is just a bit more detailed process so that you can see how what we are doing right now fits into our overall operating budget and CIP processes, through the end of this state fiscal year. So with that, that is the conclusion of my presentation. I anticipate there will be some questions, and I'm ready to field what I can. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Questions? Brian Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. More of a comment, I guess, than a question. Thank you, Samantha, for the presentation and for doing this. As has been said many times, nobody gets into the business that you are in to stop doing transit projects or stop doing transportation projects. This is not easy, but it is unfortunately necessary because of where we are. As I said, the last time this came up, the advisory board traditionally has been the largest advocate for increased capital spending by the T. And this is usually something that we would not support. However, given the authorities ramping up of spending in the last several years, up to 1.7 billion this year, we do feel that in this context, this budget fix is allowable, given where we are, and given that it would mean possibly larger service cuts or possibly other layoffs or internal savings if we don't do it. So, with great reluctance and with knowledge that commuters from Lynn and Newton and South Attleboro and Winchester are going to be losing out on the timing of some very important, incredibly important projects. Especially we've heard in the public process. I have attended all 11 meetings. People from Winchester and South Attleboro especially have been incredibly vocal about how important the station projects are to these communities. That's not to say that people in Lynn and Newton haven't discussed it. They certainly have, and the accessibility in Newton is also critical. Those stations along the pike desperately need modernization. And the parking project, the parking garage station in Lynn, as anyone has been there knows that it also needs attention. So my hope and our hope is certainly that funds can be found elsewhere through other discretionary grants or through some state money or through MBTA revenue bonds or whatever we can do to not lose too much time on these critical projects. And I just wanted to acknowledge the sacrifice that will be made by people from those that use those stations as part of this. And so, to wrap up, it is unfortunate that we're here, but this is something that we can support. My executive committee met Monday, and we discussed this, and it is not ideal, but it is something that we certainly will be supporting at this time. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Brian. Leonard Diggins.
Thanks, Ms. Silverberg. I would be impressed more, except that I'm just so used to your thoroughness. So it's par for the course that you would do such a presentation. Look, I mean, I support this. I am on this committee because I am a member of the MBTA Rider Oversight Committee, and we're a member of the Advisory Council. And for as long as I've been a part of the Oversight Committee, we have watched the operations side really struggle to provide the services that the MBTA needs and the public needs. And we have gotten more capital rich, as time has gone by, especially since that winter of 2015. But still, we often hear it's like you need to cut people's salaries or you need to cut headcount on the operations side. In fact, the operations is so starved that at times it becomes the problem, that the barrier, the limiting factor to spending the capital funds that we have. This pandemic is pointing out that deficit to a certain extent, although we might be able to mask the problem by saying, well, it's caused by the pandemic. But the operations has been suffering for a long time. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to point that out, that we need more money on the operations side, whether it comes from the states or the feds. We need more money on the operations side for the MBTA. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Jay Monty.
Morning, and thanks, Sam, again for a very thorough presentation. I'll echo everything Brian and Len said. I think, obviously times are kind of desperate, but I do appreciate the effort to preserve service. And if this is the means to do that, at least in the short term, we will certainly be supportive of that. I had a question about, you mentioned a few times the 95% of projects were still moving forward, and I was unclear whether that was 95% of projects in terms of number of projects, or that was 95% of capital funds still being spent. Because it seemed like the number is to $300 or $400 million is not 5%, right? It's a lot more than that. So if you could clarify that, and I have one question after that I'll come back to.
Jay, I've seen this in 3 different ways, and I believe it's 95% of projects. So but if the math is number of projects in the FY21 CIP, not dollars in the FY21 CIP. But let me triple check that with the team, and I will provide that back in writing.
Okay. And then just the last piece is just sort of a general comment, and I've said this before about service being difficult to bring back and that concern. Of course, I agree with the comments made this morning by Brad Rawson and the City of Somerville that we do hope, there will be some more robust discussion about, service cuts. But I just making that connection also over to, postponing capital investments, but that we're still thinking about the future because we still have, bus network redesign, we still have commuter rail vision going. And I would just note that, those are planning processes. They're important planning processes, ones that we're extremely happy to be part of. But a planning process versus a procurement versus a capital project, there's a big gap between the two. There's a lot of steps that need to take place between those two. So, I again, a little uncomfortable that we're maybe cutting a capital investment on the notion that, well, we're just going to finish up this planning process. I think the history again says that the steps from planning to implementation are long and arduous and don't always happen. So I just want to provide that cautionary note to everybody that, I think it should implore us to, be engaged and make sure that those processes do come to completion and do follow through into an implementation phase later on.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.
Eric Barassa.
Yeah, I want to echo what others have said. Samantha and Jillian and others in the Capital Planning Office. I think you guys have done a lot of great work here. I know there's a lot of moving parts to try to close this budget gap, and I appreciate the work that you've done. I've been following this closely, and I've been participating in a lot of the FMCB meetings, and one of my questions, and Sam, I don't know if you can answer this or if there's anyone else from the MBTA from the budget office, but just looking at the presentation at the FMCB meeting back on the 23rd, there was a conversation just about planning for the budget and risk for the combined FY21 and 22 gap. And at the end of it, it showed somewhere between potentially a $40 to $73 million budget surplus. And I just wanted to understand, is that something, that the T is actually planning for a surplus or is that sort of like a flexible number right now?
So I would have to defer to Marianne and her team on the specifics, but my general understanding is that we are trying as hard as we can to end 21 in a surplus so that we can roll those savings into 22 and lessen the gap in 22, since that's the year in which we will have no federal funds available to us and yet still significantly lower ridership, at least under current projections. But I know you sent some written questions on that. And I'll follow up with Marianne and team to make sure that someone gets you a response. Okay,
I appreciate that. And the last thing I would just say is, yes, absolutely support this. And I think, again, I think this is a part of a strategy of, trying to, really limit these service cuts, because I think, as others have said, we fear that being able to return the service, particularly in over the course of the next year, in the hope that these vaccines come and we actually have a recovery, and we need public transit to help with that kind of economic recovery. So thank you again for your work on this. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Eric.
Daniel Imstutz.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chair. And echoing previous comments, and appreciate the MBTA working to figure out ways to yes, reduce the impact or have fewer cuts on service or changes to service. So I do appreciate this presentation, and I think that it's a good direction or a good strategy to work with. But I guess what's missing for me is sort of the punchline or the outcome, so to speak, is how much. I guess I'm trying to understand if this goes through, or if you're able to do this and move some capital funding to operations, what impact does that have on the proposed service changes that are part of the forging ahead, that include some bus route eliminations and changes to headways and so on and so forth? So how much is this going to lessen that or lessen the need for those?
This is built into the baseline for those changes. So the set of proposals that Kat and Laurel and others have brought forward is solving for a number that assumes this full 380 million is approved. If we cannot reallocate this full $380 million, they would need to go deeper on service cuts.
I see. Thank you.
Any other questions? Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just kind of echoing what everyone else said. I think the city has been, trying to advocate for preserving as much existing service as possible. So I think this is a necessary move. And just wondering if, maybe it's a stupid question, but if this is kind of as much as we can flex from sort of capital and to preventative maintenance. And I think it would be worth considering even more of a pause on some other projects to just infuse more to free up, more operating funds again with the hope of preserving as much service as possible in the next year. And then, I think it's obvious too, hopefully there's some sort of, federal relief on the horizon. And I'm assuming that could help to backfill some of the pausing on capital funding here. Again, we don't have a crystal ball, but I guess I just wanted to reiterate, yes, I support this, and it's a needed move, and just wondering, I'm just confirming that this is really as much as we can do as far as flexing to preventative maintenance.
Technically, there is more formula funding available to the MBTA. This was the upper limit that the FMCB was comfortable with. But, I can certainly pass on the comment to my leadership and to the board that the MPO or some members of the MPO board may be interested in going further. And to the second comment about federal stimulus, yes, we would certainly look to backfill as part of our strategy should we receive additional resources.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Ben.
First, I want to thank the Samantha and the T for all the hard work that they did on this. I know this has been incredibly difficult. Basically, and I agree with just about all the comments that have been said, so I'm not going to reiterate those. But my biggest concern in the inner core is some of the proposed bus route cuts and things like that are going to affect the people that are currently being affected the most by this pandemic. These are people that rely on public transportation to get to jobs that are basically essential jobs now. And so I think we have to be very, very careful that we're just not going to make their lives even harder than they are now. And I think that's one of the concerns that I know in the inner core that we have right now. And I believe I said this 2 weeks ago, it's like temporary taxes, they tend to stay forever. And temporary cuts tend to go away. So we're very concerned about that too. And, we also understand with the Green Line coming online, that will probably change, some of the outcomes on bus routes and things like that. But we want to make sure routes like from Medford and Arlington getting into Somerville to get to the Green Line, aren't impacted because the Green Line doesn't help them if they can't get from point A to point B. And that's further exacerbated with the pause on with the CIP on the GLX to Route 16. Again, a lot of things, a lot of pieces to the puzzle, but you just want to make sure that is, in the forefront when we're having these discussions.
Thank you, Tom. Any other comments? Seeing none, can I get a motion and a second to release this amendment for 21-day public review and comment, please? And please state your name for the record. Brian Kane.
Brian Kane of the MBTA Advisory Board will move that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Eric Barassa. Can we unmute Eric?
Oh, sorry. I second that.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded, please call the roll.
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
Master seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
Master Highway,
Con Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Yes.
Massport,
Yes.
MAPC,
MAPC, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane and MBTA Advisory Board, seat 1, votes yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
I'm sorry. Advisory Council, yes.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
At-Large City of Everett,
Jay Monty, yes.
At-Large City of Newton,
Yes.
At-Large Town of Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville,
Kitty Starvel, Tom Bent, yes.
apologies, I skipped Brookline, At-Large Town of Brookline,
Brookline, yes.
Metro West City of Framingham,
Keyser votes yes.
North Shore, Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn,
Believe Tina has stepped away for the time being.
Bob, Town of Medway,
Yes. Peter Pelletier.
and Trick, Town of Norwood, NRRC.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Okay, that motion carries.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Sam. Great job. Next item on the agenda is innovations in estimating trip generation rates. Ariel Patterson and Sandy Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Ariel Patterson, and I am a transportation planner in the Certification Activities Group. Today, Sandy Johnson and I are here to present our findings from the FY 2020 UPWP study, Innovations in Estimating Trip Generation Rates. Our main objectives for this project were to research innovative practices in trip generation analysis, focusing on non-automobile modes of transportation, including transit, bicycling, and walking. Second, we're here to create a framework for ongoing research and efforts into developing improved methods at local and state levels. And three, share with our partners the ways they can apply this research to their work. So, what is trip generation analysis? It can be defined as the study of predicting to what extent and how people travel to and from developments and other locations. Most common usage is for when planners, developers, or traffic engineers conduct traffic impact analyses, or TIAs, for proposed developments. They typically use the trip generation data and analysis methods published by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, ITE. TIAs are one of the major aspects of environmental review for development and infrastructure projects. Trip generation analysis is also one step of four-step modeling. Our work, however, focuses on development projects. Next. The trip generation data and analysis methods found in ITE manuals are largely based on vehicle trips in suburban settings with separate land uses. So think big, single-use freestanding sites with plentiful parking like the image shown here. As such, these traditional methods, which were first developed in the 1970s, fail to capture characteristics of modern cities and sites that are more multimodal, i.e. travel by non-SOV modes, compact, and contain mixed uses. Since the 1970s, there has been a shift in the type of data collected to reflect these characteristics. There is now a greater focus on person trip rates instead of vehicle trips, mode shares, contextual and site-specific information, and use of TDM strategies. The field is quickly evolving and much research has been done to curate a better, more accurate approach than the most popular ones currently used today. At CTPS, there is a FY 2021 UPWP study to examine the applicability of ITE rates to the Boston region that Droshi will describe in her presentation next. MAPC has been collecting and analyzing before and after data from recently completed projects to assess ITE rates. MAPC has been working with MassDOT to submit statewide data to ITE. MassDOT has funded a study of technology to monitor person trip activities at developments and create custom trip generation rates specific to certain land uses in Massachusetts. As of November 2020, a principal investigator is expected to be named shortly. And information sharing with adjacent statewide projects and municipalities interested in improving their trip generation rate analysis methods. MPO staff participate in bi-weekly meetings with all of these stakeholders. I'm going to hand it off to Sandy.
Thanks, Ariel. So next slide, please. Our research found that approaches to improving trip generation rate estimates can be classified broadly into two camps, with no identifiable nationwide consensus as to which is, better. Both have advantages or drawbacks, but both represent an improvement over the straightforward approach that has been common for the last several decades. We'll dig into both in our presentation and, of course, in the accompanying report. The first approach can be said to adjust the ITE rates using a model. Several exist based both on national and local data, and you can, of course, find more detail in the report to achieve better outcomes. The second creates new trip generation estimates out of local observations about people's travel to and from developments or specific areas, or sometimes other sources such as the census or an MPO household travel survey. For the most part, both approaches rely on estimating person trips and then applying modal splits from other data sources rather than specifically modeling trips independently by each mode. Neither of these approaches is perfect, but they do represent a significant improvement over previous iterations of the ITE standard method that primarily analyzed and therefore favored in policy travel by single occupancy vehicle. Next slide, please. The approach of adjusting trip generation rates using other data to achieve greater accuracy, particularly with regard to non-single occupancy vehicle travel, is probably the most common improvement to the standard ITE rates. This approach uses data observed at mixed-use developments and or more urban areas where non-SOV travel is greater, and sometimes data from other sources, such as the census or an MPO travel survey, to adjust the ITE rates and establish expectations for person trips and modal splits. We understand from our interviews that this approach is in common use here in Massachusetts, including in the city of Boston. The great advantage of this approach is that the methods are fairly well established. The federal EPA promulgated an open source model, the MXE model, based on data from mixed use developments around the country nearly a decade ago, and that it fits easily into standard planning and engineering practice. Consulting firms have also built sophisticated but proprietary tools that clients on both the development and review sides can use to gain even more accuracy. Montgomery County, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., makes an interesting case study for the adjustment model for several reasons. First, the county is known nationwide for its robust and rigorous county-wide planning processes. Second, Montgomery County contains a wide variety of land use patterns, from highly urbanized areas such as Silver Spring and Bethesda to a legally protected agricultural belt. Finally, and most importantly, county planning staff have extensively documented their development review practices, policies, and methods, including trip generation analysis, in planning journals and similar literature. We were also able to interview Eric Gray, who's a transportation planning supervisor with the county. Given the importance of robust planning practices to Montgomery County and the diversity of land use patterns, the county deemed it important to come up with a trip generation process that would accurately reflect that diversity. The process that they have developed is explained on the slide. Like most adjustment approaches, it relies on combining ITE rates and local assumptions about mode splits in particular areas to develop ultimate trip generation estimates by mode. This method has found robust local support, but county staff are still exploring ways to further improve, including possibly developing a method based entirely on locally observed data, such as that used by neighboring Washington, D.C. The second broad approach we identified for improving trip generation rates is what we're calling creation of new rates. Basically, a jurisdiction gathers enough data within its own borders that it can use that data to build a model or use existing developments as proxies for the effects of new ones. As you can see from our selection of case studies, New York City, San Francisco, Cambridge, and Washington, D.C., this is mainly a process employed by large, dense, wealthy jurisdictions with robust planning departments and significant amounts of new development. The richness and quality of this type of data cannot be beaten, but it is very money and resource intensive to collect and requires significant local capacity. It's also a considerable break from traditional ITE-based practices, so some jurisdictions may run into resistance from stakeholders entrenched in the existing methods. One of the most interesting examples of this approach to replacing ITE trip generation rates entirely, one that illustrates both the quality of the data this method produces and the immense complexity involved, is right here in the Boston region in Cambridge. Since 1992, Cambridge has been collecting data on trips and mode splits to and from major developments, particularly commercial or office developments. Developments above a certain size or that have applied for a change in use are required to submit Planning and Transportation Demand Management, or PTDM, plans to the city. These cover about 45% of Cambridge's workforce, with a heavy concentration in the Kendall area. After 20 years of data collection, in the last few years, Cambridge planners have been able to mostly substitute entirely locally collected data in place of census and ITE data in their development review efforts. Cambridge has staff dedicated to the PTDM ordinance and to handling the data. Both how long it took to generate a critical mass of data and the need to provide dedicated staff illustrate the potential drawbacks to generating and using such rich, accurate data. The case studies I've just discussed, and indeed the whole report, were based not just on published literature, but on interviews with a wide variety of agency and municipal staff, consultants, and others in the MPO region and in our case study cities, including several MPO board members or staff from MPO member municipalities. There's a listing of these interviewees as an appendix to the report. I believe it's on page 37, and we're grateful to all of them. We just wanted to share a few of the key insights that we heard from some of these folks that add to the rest of the information in this presentation and in the report. Our interviewees were all eager to share and to spread best practices, but also aware of the complexities and challenges involved in a field with such stakes and a complex entrenched standard method. Within the MPO region, we did find an acute awareness that because of the number of municipalities in the Boston area, the development review process, including transportation review, can feel fragmented and overly complex. MassDOT's unified approach to projects that are large enough to trigger MIPA review does mitigate this to some extent, but it's still a challenge for developers working on multiple smaller projects in different municipalities. Some municipalities within the region feel like they would like to improve their practices, but that they do not have the capacity and they're looking for regional scale leadership and assistance. And I will hand it back to Ariel to finish this presentation off.
So this research will inform and support several ongoing and upcoming efforts in the region to improve the trip generation analysis across all modes of transportation. Regarding a collaborative project with MAPC and MassDOT, BTPS modelers are analyzing data from 29 developments to verify accuracy of ITE trip generation rates. One project goal is to develop a database based on state-specific data from a wide range of project types and land use classifications to analyze new developments more accurately than existing methods. We established a really good network too, with in-state and out-of-state planners, and we look forward to more information sharing, especially as more and more cities develop their locally calibrated tools. Although out of scope for the project, we noted the increasing number of local and statewide policy measures, such as limiting parking supply, that support and supplement trip generation methodologies across the US. We hope to revisit this topic in a future project at CTPS. In sum, a 2016 ITE white paper says it best. A revised methodology is particularly needed for proper analysis of sites in urban or mixed-use settings where access by bike, transit, and walk are significant. Person trips and associated mode splits and vehicle occupancies are needed to explain variations in travel between different land uses, as well as similar land uses in different built environment contexts. And finally, to reiterate what Sandy said, thank you so much to our interviewees. We connected with experts working on the ground in this field from both the public and private sector, consultants, local, regional, and state government employees. Some have even joined us this morning over Zoom, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Ariel.
Finally,
Andy?
yep. Any questions for you guys?
Yeah, do you want to, let me ask you a question. Do you want to talk about the work scope and then take questions on the whole subject matter, or do you want to take questions on this and then do the work scope?
I'm happy to do it either way, whatever you prefer, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so why, with the indulgence of the members, why don't we talk about the work scope? Because I think some of the questions might bleed over into the work scope anyway. So why don't you present the work scope and then we'll take questions on both the work that has been done and the upcoming work you want to do.
Sounds great.
Joshi, whenever you're ready. Oh,
Yes.
Joshi, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Drashti Joshi, and I work in Trial Applications Group as a modeler at CTPS. I'm describing a complementary effort to what you heard from Sandy and Ariel. I'm going to begin with a brief background on what I and others did last year on this topic, and then present the work scope for the continuation of that work. ITE, Institute of Transportation Engineers, produces trip generation rates that are the industry standard. These are used for MEPA studies, traffic impact studies, and can be used as another estimate of travel behavior to accompany our travel demand model. The trouble is, ITE is a national organization. They estimate the rates from data across the country, and our area in Northeast is not necessarily well represented in that sample size. So over the last year, the team, MassDOT, MAPC, and CTPS has been working to investigate this to see how we are different. The team looked at completed projects and trial monitoring reports submitted after MEPA review in the Boston region and selected a variety of projects to submit to ITE. We also looked at the possibility of updated land use categories as a way of segmenting trip generation rates. With all that work, we got to this point, and now I'm going to talk about the UPWP work scope to continue that work. This UPWP study is for a trip generation rate research study. This is an MPO funded study that has been defined in UPWP and is only for the task that CTPS will be completing for this study. This research study will produce detailed literature review for the current and alternative practices on the use of trip generation rates. It will support the coordination effort to provide new data to ITE. It will explore new land use categories as a way of segmenting trip generation rates. This study is expected to take approximately 8 months and is budgeted for $45,000. With that, if you have any questions, I will try to answer them.
Thank you, Joshi. So staff, members, are there any questions on either the work scope or the presentation or both? Jay Monty.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So Sandy and Ariel, great job. I think we've talked about this work before and how important it is to cities like Everett. I know I've mentioned this before. You know, we're in the process of really revamping. There's a ordinance before the council right now, a transportation demand management ordinance that will have the effect of essentially nullifying our parking requirements. They'll still be on the books, but it'll treat the difference between a developer's proposed parking and the zoning requirement as an impact that they can mitigate. And so we'll no longer be holding folks to a hard number of parking spaces. But what goes with that, obviously, is they need to mitigate. They need to provide amenities that make their development less dependent on parking and more dependent on transit, on alternative modes. And I think a couple things. One is that we've seen that developers who come in and they may have the desire to build less parking, but they go to finance their projects and the bank says, no, we don't believe that you can actually build a viable project without little parking. I think that's rooted in part in what you brought up in the beginning of the presentation, which is banks are familiar with the traditional ITE modeling. They're less comfortable with some of the more progressive modeling. So I think to that extent, I think this is great work that will give them the tools to maybe overcome that problem. But the other piece of that is that there's again this chicken and egg issue where if we're simply looking at an existing location, an existing land use, and then predicting out what the appropriate parking and trip generation will be based on what is there today, it doesn't get us to what do we need to provide in order to get us to a desired trip generation in terms of vehicle mode share versus transit mode share. So I guess my point is just that as you move forward, what will be really helpful for I think us and other communities is to know, okay, yes, and on a baseline, the city of Everett is not the same as Sturbridge, Mass, right, in terms of trip generation. But what are the things that we can ask developers to do that have meaningful and demonstrated impacts that will reduce their single occupancy vehicle trip generation, if that makes sense?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I think you're bringing up a really critical question. And certainly the concern about financing is something I remember you talking about before when we did hear from other interviewees. And I think, as Ariel mentioned, looking at more policy options is something that was out of scope for this study. But certainly, to wear my other hat, we are developing the new UPWP. We're welcome to submit study ideas. And it's something that we at CTPS would certainly be interested in engaging on and researching more. And if you have further questions, I think some of the people we added to our network through the study would be happy to chat with you.
Great. Thank you. Daniel Amstead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ariel and Sandy, for this work. I look forward to digging into the report that you've produced at greater detail. Sort of following up on what Jay was saying, he reminded me actually that just last night, the Arlington Special Town Meeting approved a change to our zoning bylaw that will allow our redevelopment board and ZBA to actually reduce the parking requirements for new developments in our major business districts to 0. It was previously at 25. They could reduce it to about a quarter of the parking requirement, and partly due to an issue that we had with a development that was going in or planned to go in Arlington Heights that had basically no way of including any off-street parking. They had to get a variance for that, which was a larger hurdle. We've made this approved this change to allow by special permit these reductions in parking to 0, so we can avoid some of the more challenging aspects of those. So we're also working on ways in which we can reduce the parking requirements and sort of change the way that developments are sort of look at how people actually get to their developments, to their uses and so on. So a couple of questions also, I guess, partly related to or connected to what Jay was referencing. I guess the first thing is when he was talking about developers and going to banks and getting loans and I think the other part of that, or something I was wondering was, I mean, I think a regional approach is a good idea, because obviously all of our communities and municipalities don't have the capacity to have our own very, very localized set of data about what kind of trips our own developments create. But when it comes to, say, the consultants that do the work to look at these or create these traffic impact assessments, they always, reference the ITE data. We have a transportation advisory committee that sort of, suggests that they use different types of data in order to get those trip generation rates. I'm sort of curious as if this comes to a more regional approach, or a way that we can get this information, collect better data for our region that maybe could be better utilized by, say, consultants that are working on these developments to understand their impacts. Or how do you institute that? Or is that sort of through the ITE work or the connections to the ITE that actually happens? That's one question. And then the other question I'll just ask is about, I think ITE also has parking demand calculations that they do. And I'm a little unclear as to how connected they are to trip generation, but I know it's not the same. And I'm wondering if there was some discussion when you were doing your interviews and your research on the parking demand side of things, since I think those are also, again, utilized to understand, well, here's how much parking we need. Although this also, communities also have their own requirements for like minimum parking standards and so on for developments. So I'm sort of curious as to whether there was some discussion of looking at the parking demand side of things and how those are connected to trip generation.
Yeah, those are both great questions. So to address the question about kind of consultants who are doing the traffic impact assessments first, this is something that came up a lot in our interviews with folks in other cities and here in the MPO region. And people have had varying experiences, I think it would be fair to say. In some places, there's been a significant amount of resistance to change and bring in new strategies. Some of that can be mitigated by using the adjustment approach instead of the approach where you're creating new rates whole cloth, because the adjustment approach really does kind of fit into the overall framework. But my impression from our research is that for the most part, when a municipality or a county or whomever, whatever jurisdiction has just gone ahead and created a new framework, that once it's shown to work, people get on board. And that was, generally what was reported to us. There's obviously a lot of work up front, but eventually people do get on board. And in Montgomery County in particular, it seems like everybody hopped on board pretty quickly. And again, I'll make the same offer I made to Jay, which is that we'd be happy to connect you with some of the people we talked to. To your second question, Daniel, it's interesting. So we didn't dig into the parking stuff a lot, but we did hear very clearly from our colleagues in Cambridge and in especially folks who worked on this type of project in Washington, D.C., that they see an arrow of causality very clearly running from greater parking to greater single occupancy vehicle trips. And that they have collected all this data and spent a lot of time and money on collecting mode trip and trip generation data, and eventually basically come to the conclusion, and you can see this in the report, that the most important factor is parking provision. And that what the outcomes that they want to achieve are achieved best by regulating parking. So that's not a complete answer to all of your questions, because I don't feel qualified at this moment to give one, but I think it's an important data point.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I would like to add something here. So ongoing ITE database effort, where we are looking into the completed projects in Massachusetts and more projects in Boston region. Those collected project data does include if that project has a parking availability or not. And the plan is, if we provide this real data to ITE in the next version, ITE also produces the online manual, which is an Excel spreadsheet, where this is the talk that they provide the Boston specific drop-down menu where the local developers can enter their development and they get the Boston specific rates. So this may get addressed given the actual collected data. And also we are looking into the new land use types, which is more like transit accessibility based. Given that we have seen more and more data on the mixed land use development category. So the new land use type will address where are these new collected projects are and how much transit accessible it is. And so when it comes for the parking, that land use type will be helpful.
Thank you. Lynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as Dan Amstutz pointed out, we did indeed improve that change to the zoning bylaw. One of the reasons I didn't get to bed until about 1 o'clock last night. But anyways, the report is, the memo especially is great. And as I read it, I just had a lot of curiosity questions. I'm not going to ask any of them now. What I would like to do is maybe meet with you all at some point in time over the next few weeks or so. And so what I want to ask to the chair and the executive director, you don't have to answer me now, is maybe how, when I arrange this meeting, I can maybe, make it clear that that's going to happen so that if other members of the board would like to join me in that meeting, it would be great. I welcome that because often I learn more from other people's questions than I do from mine, but I don't want to run into open meeting law issues. So I will talk to all of you all offline, but you'll hear from me later. Thank you.
Yeah, so Lynn, talk to Kagan about whether it makes sense to do that as part of like a UPWP committee meeting or even Jay's congestion meeting, because then it'll just be posted and it can just be agenda item. But talk to Kagan about it afterwards and we'll figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Jim Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick thanks to Sandy and Drashti and Ariel for this great work. We were able to kind of huddle with them and happy to continue with these next steps and these additional work scopes to continue this really important work. And just to echo what Jay and Daniel said, I think it's really helpful for the work we do on a daily basis in reviewing development and all the analysis that goes into that. So just again, happy to see this work progress and continue. And the city's revising their parking ratio requirements for new development, as well as modernizing our TDM policies as well, that are going to be wrapping up in the next year or so. So we're really excited to have this work help with those efforts. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I need a motion to approve the work scope Drashti presented. Please state your name and affiliation for the record. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa with MAPC. I make a motion to approve the work scope as presented.
Leonard Diggins.
And as a poor substitute for Mr. Kane, I second it.
Motion having been made and seconded, please call the roll, Roisin.
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2, looks like
John Bouchard, yes, sorry.
no worries, thank you. MassDOT Highway,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Yes.
Massachusetts Port Authority, looks like
Christian,
perhaps
I don't think
Laura has left. Okay.
Yeah.
MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board, Brian, there he is.
Brian Kane, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Advisor Council, yes. Leonard Diggins.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston, BPDA.
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
At-large City of Everett.
Jay Monty, yes.
At-large City of Newton.
Seem to be having an issue unmuting.
Okay, I'll come back. At-large Town of Arlington.
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
At-large Town of Brookline.
Heather Hamilton votes yes.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Tom Bent, yes.
Metro West, City of Framingham.
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly.
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn.
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Southwest, Town of Medway.
Peter Pelletier votes yes.
Trick, Town of Norwood, and RRC.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is a work scope on addressing priority corridors from the Long Range Transportation Plan. Seth Asante.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Seth Asante. This work program that I'm presenting is MPO funded study. The priority corridor studies addresses arterial segments identified in the needs assessments of the Long Range Transportation Plan. These are corridors that need safety improvements and modernization to address congestion, multimodal transportation, and complete street issues. MPO staff have conducted several priority corridor studies. This is the 9th year. Municipalities and MassDOT like these studies because they provide them at the conceptual level what will be required to address deficiencies in the corridors before committing design and engineering fund to a roadway improvement project. In the past, MPO staff have conducted priority corridor studies for Route 203 in Boston, Route 1A in Lynn, Swampscott and Salem, Route 138 in Canton and Milton, Route 16 in Chelsea and Everett, and Route 140 in Franklin. Many of the short-term improvements have been implemented. Some of the studies have also advanced into projects on the MassDOT project information database, and some are currently in design. The objectives of the priority corridor study is to select an arterial segment from those listed in the Long Range Transportation Plan needs assessment using a set of selection criteria. Identify the transportation-related problems and needs, and work with municipalities and MassDOT to develop multimodal transportation and complete street solutions to the problem. There are 7 tasks in this work program. They include establishing an advisory task force composed of municipal officials and representatives from MassDOT and other stakeholders. Collect and gather data for analysis, perform analysis to quantify and identify the problems and needs, and work with the advisory task force to develop improvement strategies and concepts. Staff will document the study results and present them to the MPO. This is a 3C funded work, and it has a budget of $137,000, and it will take 10 months to complete. The study meets the MPO goal of safety, capacity management and mobility, system preservation, and economic vitality. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Any questions from the members? Seeing none, can I get a motion in a second to approve as presented today? Please state your name for the record. Eric Barassa.
Eric Barassa, I make a motion to approve the work scope as presented.
Daniel Amstutz.
Daniel Amstutz, seconds.
Thank you. Motion having been made and seconded, please call the roll.
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway Division,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Yes.
Massport, okay, MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Leonard Diggins, yes.
City of Boston BTD,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
at-large City of Everett,
Jay Monty, yes.
at-large City of Newton, have we fixed Nicole's muting issue or no?
It would seem no. I don't think
At-large
so.
Town of Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
at-large Town of Brookline,
Heather Hamilton votes yes.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville,
Tom Bent votes yes.
Metro West, City of Framingham,
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn,
Cassidy votes yes.
Southwest Planning Committee, Town of Medway,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
and Trick, Town of Norwood.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you, Rosine. Next item on the agenda. It's a work scope addressing safety, mobility, and access on sub-regional priority roadways. Jinwan Wang.
Good morning. My name is Zhen Yang Wang, MPO staff, traffic engineering, traffic analysis and design group. This work program is parallel to the priority corridors that Seth just presented. It focuses on the arterial and the collector roadways that are not identified as priority corridor in the long-range transportation plan needs assessment. Through input from the MPO's sub-regional outreach meetings, this program aims to address safety, mobility, access on the sub-regional priority roadway for all users, including people who walk, bike, and take public transportations, and the people who deliver goods and services, and the owner of the adjacent properties. Like the priority corridor studies, this program is well received by the cities and towns and the Mesta district offices. Several of the previous studies have been Mesta project and are under advanced design stage, such as Route 3A in Cohasset and Scituate, Route 20 in Marlborough, Summer Rockland Street in Hingham, and the Route 1A in Rentham. Currently, we are in the final stage of the Route 53 study in Norwell and are in the process of selecting a study location for this new fiscal year. Major tasks of this program are similar to the priority corridors. The estimated budget is $127,900 and the schedule to complete it in 10 months. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the members? Seeing none, can we get a motion and a second to approve as presented today? Please state your name for the record. Brian Kane.
I'm happy to make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Brian. Eric Barassa.
I'm happy to second that motion.
Thank you, Eric. I'm happy to hear those motions. Regine, please call the roll.
Happy to call the roll. MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT State 2,
MassDOT, John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway Division,
Ron Romano happily votes yes.
MBTA,
MBTA happily votes yes.
Massport, MAPC,
Eric Barassa, yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
I'm delighted to vote yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Who knew these meetings could be so much fun? Yes, of course.
City of Boston, Boston Transportation Department,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston BPDA,
Jim Fitzgerald, yes.
At-large City of Everett,
Jay Monty, yes.
At-large Town of Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz votes yes.
At-large Town of Brookline,
Heather Hamilton votes yes.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville,
Tom Bent votes yes.
Metro West, City of Framingham,
Thatcher Keyser votes yes.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn,
Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Southwest Planning Committee, Town of Medway,
Peter Pelletier, yes.
Trick, Town of Norwood, and RRC.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
And I believe Nicole is now with us, so I'll go back. At-large City of Newton.
Yeah, we're here. We vote yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is an action item. It's a work scope for regional travel demand management strategies coordination. Sandy Johnston.
Hello again, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I am back to present the work scope for the federal fiscal year 2021 UPWP task Regional Travel Demand Management Strategies Coordination. Despite the somewhat wonky and long title, this is a pretty simple scope for $10,000. The idea for this task grew out of discussions at the UPWP committee last spring. There's an interest in the topic of TDM, but a feeling that the topic has been sufficiently examined through the lens of studies, and that what's needed is a chance for stakeholders to discuss and work together. MPO staff and MEPC will jointly host 2 forums on the topic of travel demand management. The idea is to hold one virtually in the January-February timeframe, and the second, hopefully in person, in the August-September timeframe. If it is not yet safe to hold the second forum in person, we will hold it virtually. One of the forums will cover the challenges of TDM in a post-COVID world and how TDM techniques may have to transform given possible changes in commuting patterns. The other will cover legislative, legal, and other challenges to implementing robust TDM measures in Massachusetts. Based on initial conversations with MEPC staff, it appears likely that the first forum in the January-February timeframe will cover the topic of TDM in a post-COVID world, and the second one in August-September will cover legal and legislative issues. Finally, through the dialogue and coordination efforts to support these forums, we hope to create a durable framework for discussing TDM issues in the Boston region, perhaps a working group or a similar entity. That's all I have, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time. If there are none, I respectfully request your approval of the work scope.
Thank you, Sandy. Questions? Lynn Diggins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is addressed maybe to you as much as to Sandy. If we are able to meet in person, and I hope we are, I mean, are we thinking about how we might still incorporate this remote access into the meetings? Because I think that will help with attendance and certainly make it easier for people who may have a hard time getting to the physical location. And so it's something I wanted us to think about maybe for these meetings and maybe for other meetings. It could be part of new business, but I just wanted to bring it up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. And yes, I think Tegan and the staff should think about how to transition to in-person meetings that would include virtual participation, but I will leave it to their very able hands. Kim Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question about the scope. Is Mass Commute still an active organization? What would their role be in these workshops?
So I don't know, Ken. I don't know. I think it depends on what you define as active. I believe Mass Commute's the TMA umbrella is still active. Yes.
I believe it's a very small office, and they would certainly be one of the people we would engage in kind of defining, asking for help finding speakers and, defining what questions to ask and such.
But you're planning outreach beyond just the TMAs, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, can we get a motion and a second to approve this work scope as presented today? Eric Barassa.
I'll make the motion to approve the work scope.
Thank you. Lynn Diggins.
I will second it.
Motion has been made and seconded. Please call the roll.
MassDOT Chair,
Yes.
MassDOT Seat 2,
John Bouchard, yes.
MassDOT Highway,
John Romano, yes.
MBTA,
Yes.
Massport, MAPC,
Yes.
MBTA Advisory Board,
Brian Kane, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council,
Advisory Council, yes. Leonard Diggins.
City of Boston, BTD,
Bill Conroy, yes.
City of Boston, BPDA,
Yes.
at-large City of Everett,
Dave Monte, yes.
at-large City of Newton,
City of Newton, yes.
at-large Town of Arlington,
Daniel Amstutz, yes.
at-large Town of Brookline,
Heather Hamilton votes yes.
Intercore Committee, City of Somerville,
Tom Bent votes yes.
Metro West, City of Framingham,
Patrick Keyser votes yes.
North Shore Task Force, City of Beverly,
Darlene Wynn votes yes.
North Suburban Planning Council, City of Woburn.
City of Woburn, Tina Cassidy votes yes.
Southwest Advisory Planning Committee, Town of Medway.
Peter Pelletier, yes.
And Trick, Town of Norwood, NRRC.
Tom O'Rourke, yes.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regine. Next item on the agenda is member items. Are there any? Seeing and hearing none, our next meeting is, I think, 2 weeks from now, 10 o'clock. Can we get before we get a motion to adjourn, can I just say thank you, Regine, for stepping in and covering all the roll call duties today? Now, can I get a motion in a second to adjourn? Brian King.
I am actually very happy to make this motion.
Eric Barassa.
And I'm very happy to second it.
Without objection, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much. See you at the next meeting. Good work, everybody.